I'm gonna kill them all, sir. Soldiers is a very badass quote from this criminally underrated gem of movie. Before Alien vs. Predator, Paul W. S. Anderson made an addition of his own to another famous sci-fi movie universe established by Ridley Scott, and we're gonna look at it today. Taking place in the year 2036, Soldier tells the story of hardened veteran Sergeant Todd 3465, who is part of an elite intergalactic military force whose members were raised since birth to be the perfect combatants and killing machines. One day, during a training session with Kane 607, a new breed of genetically engineered soldiers created by Colonel Meekum, Todd is seriously injured and is subsequently left for dead on the waste disposal planet Arcadia 234. There he is taken in by a colony of settlers and he does his best to adjust to their way of life, taking it upon himself to protect them when Colonel Meekum, along with Todd's former superiors, return to conduct a training exercise on the planet, ordering Kane and the rest of his team to wipe out any sign of life. Let me give a little clarification before we dive in. This movie and Blade Runner were both written by David Webb Peoples, and he has confirmed that they do indeed take place in the same universe. There are even a couple of references to Roy Batty's iconic final monologue. Beyond that connection, though, Soldier, like Event Horizon, shows that Paul W. S. Anderson can be a pretty good filmmaker when he wants to. Sure, the way he handles the film's central themes of the horrors of colonialism, the dehumanization of the military and the treatment of war veterans is not as finessed as the way Ridley Scott and Denis Villeneuve handled the themes of the mainline Blade Runner entries, and there are some pacing issues, but overall his direction is on point, showcasing some pretty neat visual storytelling right out of the gate with the prologue that details the kind of life that Todd and his fellow soldiers are bred for. On that note, let's talk about the cast, starting with our main lead, Sergeant Todd 3465, played by Snake Plissken himself, Kurt Russell. Despite the movie's aforementioned issues, I really have to give props to Anderson for the way he directed Russell here. This is a role that requires Russell to be very stoic and deadpan for the majority of the film's runtime, and he has very few lines of spoken dialogue in the whole film. In other words, we are basically being shown what Russell would have been like as the Terminator if that role had gone to him instead of Schwarzenegger. And in that regard, his take would have been pretty good. But I digress. The point is that for a good amount of his screen time Russell has to emote only through his eyes, and needless to say, he pulls it off quite well. Besides, it's not like he has to be stone-faced all the time. The moments that call for him to let his pent-up emotions out and display them on his face may be few and far between, but they feel earned and resonant, reflecting Todd's character development. Anderson and Russell do a good job portraying Todd's PTSD and the connection he forms with the settlers that take him in, particularly Connie Nielsen's Sandra, Sean Pertwee's Mace and their son Nathan, who is played by twins Jared and Taylor Thorne. Other standouts among the settlers include their leader Hawkins, played by Brenda Well, Ben Grimm himself, Michael Chiklis as Jimmy Pig, Elizabeth Dennehy as Jimmy's wife, and Paul Dillon as the skeptical Slade. We also have Jason Scott Lee as Todd's main rival Kane 607, Gary Busey. KK Dodds and Mark Bring-Elson as Todd's superiors Church, Sloan, and Rubrick, and Jason Isaacs as the smarmy Colonel Meekum, who is a textbook example of a cartoony villain. If his mustache was bushier and more curled up, he would definitely be twirling it. Lack of subtlety notwithstanding, Isaacs once again proves his impeccable talent for playing detestable scumbags. Special shout out goes to Russell's son Wyatt, who plays Todd at age 11 during the prologue. Finally, we have the technical aspects. David Tattersall is quickly becoming one of my favorite cinematographers. His style is perfectly suited for high-concept sci-fi and fantasy projects, and this movie is no exception. His camera work here is once again outstanding. One of my favorite shots in the movie comes shortly after Todd is dumped on Arcadia 234. The camera zooms out to reveal that he is standing at the foot of one of the countless towers of garbage that make up the majority of the planet's landscape, stretching out as far as the eye can see, and the further the camera pulls back, the more Todd appears like a speck. Speaking of which, I also have to give major props to production designer David L. Snyder because, a few understandably dated CGI effects aside, the majority of what you see on screen is done practically and in camera. The locations, costumes, vehicles, and props in this movie all look amazing. The action sequences are well done, the fights between Todd and Kane are brutal, and certain moments during the climax feel reminiscent of the first 3 Rambo films. Joel McNeely's score is pretty neat, too. In conclusion, even without its connection to the Blade Runner franchise, Soldier is quite an enjoyable sci-fi action flick with some pretty compelling and relevant themes, and like Mortal Kombat and Event Horizon before it, it shows that Paul W.S. Anderson has plenty of potential as a filmmaker. It's such a shame that his career started on such a promising note only to completely go downhill afterwards. I hope one day he looks back on those 3 films, remember what made them work, and use them as a basis to make a comeback the same way M. Night Shyamalan made a comeback with The Visit and Split. In the meantime, if you're a fan of Kurt Russell, then Soldier is definitely worth a watch, so assemble your squad and check it out. After all, this film is a criminally underrated and underappreciated Western in outer space. I highly recommend it to fans of both Kurt Russell and to an extent Blade Runner. Soldier gets an 8 out of 10. Let us know if the comments below, like, dislikes, subscribe, hit button notification. What's your opinion on this film? Or thanks for watching, see you later. Bye.